how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 464, and my guest is Michael Trapani. I learned about Michael from his fascinating TikTok that discusses World War II. He has his own podcast, How to Start a War, which was a precursor to his book of the same name. It's only on Audible. I highly recommend it. It is not like a usual audiobook in that he uses narrative storytelling and drama to bring history to life. He uses really cool music and he uses actual speeches from the time period and he weaves it all together. It's really, really good. I've recommended it to so many friends. Everybody loves it. They recommend it to their friends. I get no kickbacks to say this. It's really an excellent book, How to Start a War. What struck me most about it was how much about Hitler's, so it's about World War II, it's about Hitler's rise to power. So what struck me the most about it was that he covers so much about the, I would say, more minutiae stuff that I never learned in school. I was never taught. There's so much about World War II, rightfully so, that focuses on the Holocaust and the basics of Hitler's rise to power. But in this case, I would say Michael really goes into the step-by-step from way, way, way back. Way, way, way back. All the things that sort of fed into a system that would allow somebody like a Hitler to do the things that he did. I'm going to quote just the Audible's quote on it. It, quote, describes Germany's first gambles on the world stage and the resulting international fallout. It pinpoints the very moment that the world realized it could not trust Hitler. A gripping blend of narrative storytelling and dramatized scenes and characters, How to Start a War feels like a golden age radio drama. Far from a dry history lesson, How to Start a War is a resonant and compelling story about what happens when good people do nothing to stop the worst evils while they still can. I'm telling you, even if you're really not a history person, it's just so good. And I think it's such an important listen as well. Again, he has a podcast under the same name, and the book covers more information. So I know some people are like, Audible's not a book. And again, don't get any kickbacks from Audible. It's just the only place to find it. So I looked on Libby, it's not there. So hopefully in the future it will be, but for now, that's where to get it. So if you have Audible, or if you can do like the free Audible for a month or something, definitely check it out. Although I don't know if that is helpful to Michael, but it's really good. I want people to listen to it. So in summation, Michael is a historian, author, playwright, master storyteller, voice and stage actor, podcaster, and all around really interesting dude. Excited for you to hear this episode. All right, general stuff. In December, my friend Rachel Kais, who's a multidisciplinary artist like myself, she and I will be doing an online event on Zoom at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, talking about creativity, creative blocks, and how to tap into our creative subconscious. More details will be coming. We'll be doing some short Instagram lives on November 16th, 7 p.m. PST, and November 21st at 4 p.m. PST to chat about the event. Please go to www.intraverse.creative, INTRAVERSE, Intraverse Creative, and you have to do the www. I'm not sure why. In other news, check out heyhumanpodcast.com for links and to learn more about my guests and the show. Check out susanruth.com to learn more about me and my other artistic endeavors. And follow Susan Ruthism on social media. Find my music on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you get your music. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon. I mean, it's all over the place. So wherever you get your podcasts, thank you for listening. Be well, be kind, be love. And here we go. Michael Trapani, welcome to Hey Human.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. I learned about you while doom scrolling TikTok and came
As
across,
we all do.
Yes, and came across your really fantastic feed and the history lessons that you're giving. And so I had to reach out to you. So I appreciate that you're here. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, excited to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, but this doom scrolling will do.
Doom scrolling it is. Yeah. Let's start at the very beginning of you. Tell me where you grew up and what shaped you, more specifically, what shaped you into the trajectory of the historian that you are today.
Yeah, so I grew up in the New York suburbs, moved into the city when I was a teenager. So New York area in general, I still live in the New York City area. I'd say the early parts of my childhood that contributed the most to some of the work that I do today is a combination of the historical aspect, the interest that I've had, and the studies that I've taken on, but then also the performance of it that I do in specific ways that come out in some of the work that I produce. So I'll start with the history part. I've always been fascinated with transitional moments in human history. I think that there is a tendency for most of us to think about the world we live in as the way it's always been, the way it always will be, just because the human lifespan is only so long. Our memories are only so, go back only so far. And it's really easy to just think about the world today as, the way it always has been, or to see any changes in the world today as entirely new, or a rupture to a system that we understand. And when you zoom out, I always like to say that context over a long enough period of time is history, because when you zoom out far enough, you can see that while certain things may never have happened in our lifetimes, they have happened many times before, from pandemics to financial crises to global wars to all sorts of crazy, sometimes really wonderful things. They have happened. And while they don't happen exactly the same way every time, there's often a lot of lessons you can take away from those moments and apply them to the world today. So that's always been an interest of mine. And then my study on the history side took place at Fordham University. I studied under Professor Hamlin, who is a European historian. And my thesis was based on the idea that the French Revolution to the end of World War II was a single 150-year conflict with breaks in between, because the connections between all of those conflicts were significant. And so that's the history part. The other part is around the sort of audio, radio drama, golden age radio drama style that I produce some of my work. And that's, I have to give credit to my grandmother, who, when I was a young kid, while a lot of kids got, bedtime stories, I received audio cassettes of golden age radio dramas. And I would fall asleep listening to the likes of The New Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and a great show, which is like a precursor to the Twilight Zone, called Suspense, some of the old Westerns, some of the comedies. And they are a masterclass on audio drama, from sound effects to music to voices, just an incredible, right? And then obviously the big famous ones like Mercury Theater on the Air, War of the Worlds. So just wonderful stories.
Oh, good. It scared the crap out of.
Exactly.
I thought it was real.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how good it was. It's funny you mentioned that, just because it was so real, right? People thought it was real. And I learned later that they were getting a bunch of wind that it was causing panic in real time while they were doing the show. And they had to apologize at the end, because it happened also on Halloween. That episode was aired. And so there was just stuff going on outside, weird anyway. It's a bit of a sidetrack. But yeah, so the radio dramas played a big part in my performance aspect. And that was something that I wanted to bring to life.
Yeah, when I heard that in your introduction, it reminded me of when I was little. On the weekends, my parents and my brother and I would listen to radio drama. And usually it was Agatha Christie or some sort of something. And that would be our sort of Sunday evening deal. And I had such fond memories of being on the floor and looking up at my dad in his big chair, and everyone's sitting around, they're drinking coffee, and we're just like, oh, so cool.
It's so much fun. Yeah, there's it's a lot like reading a book where you sort of play the images in your head, but you have the benefit of some dramatization and performance that is sort of a lost art. I mean, when you think about this is pre-television, pre-film. So imagine all of the world's entertainment talent and budget going into a medium like radio, into a single channel, and imagining those performances. They're real. Most of them are still up on YouTube, so they're worth listening to if you get a chance.
They're fantastic. Also, I mean, I think the reason why Audible was such a phenomenon is because it harkens back to when we were little and our parents read to us. And there's nothing better than that. There's nothing better than falling asleep to someone reading to you.
That's exactly right. And it's funny because now, the younger generation, I have two young kids, and they have, in a sort of effort to move away from screens, they now have toys that basically act as audio players.
Like a Teddy Ruxpin?
Yeah. Like, it's like I forgot the name of it. Yoto, I think is what they're called. But it's basically like they have these cards of stories that you can put in and take out, and they kind of work like an old Game Boy or something where you just throw the card in, and it'll have like the stories with the movies they like or the shows they like, but it's just audio. There's no screen, and they can fall asleep to it. And, it's a cool next generation version of it.
It gives me hope because I feel like we're so lost into our screens and disconnected that maybe, and also as a creative myself, I worry about the AI taking over the creativity, and that kids growing up now will rely so heavily on this artificial intelligence that they'll lose their own. And so that excites me to think that maybe that will inspire story in their minds.
I think so. I think there's hope. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, you do seem hopeful. I've got to say too, the other thing about when I was watching your TikToks is even though you're talking about really heavy subjects and clearly sort of giving a wink, although I don't know if people pick up on that, I'm sure many do, that you seem hopeful that it's not all is lost. Obviously, you stay in a particular time frame, at least the ones that I've seen of World War II, but I don't know. I don't know if there's just an impish quality to you, or if there is this idea that don't give up hope that this happened. It can be stopped from happening again.
You're exactly right. I would say that I'm more hopeful than the average person who compares today's moments to some of the worst events in human history, which I do. There's a lot that I talk about around the rise of authoritarianism, the rise of extremism, and the fall of democracy. That's the subject of a lot of my work. But I think the main message I'm trying to deliver in a lot of my work is that while things can be bad, especially in the modern era that people find themselves living in today, they can get a lot worse. And while on the surface that might sound pessimistic, to me, what it says is that there's still a lot of time, and we are in the moment when we are the most powerful right now. And the average person who would have every reason to think that the system will work with or without them, and we're just cogs in a machine and decisions are made above our heads, I think it's important to realize that there has never been a system of control that has been powerful enough to keep an informed and engaged citizenry contained forever. And that only happens when folks understand their power and realize just how many more of us than there are of the people who try to control the average person. And as bad as things might seem, there's no better time than right now to do something to make the world better. And it has happened, even that sort of overcoming of the bad has also happened just as often as the bad sort of winning in that moment.
At the top of our conversation, you spoke of the cyclical nature of these sorts of events. And I'm sure many of my listeners, you may have also seen the guy at the whiteboard that's circling the 80-year trajectory that just keeps repeating over and over again in 20-year clumps. And I don't know, as you said, is it memory? Is it that we aren't even really given true history? The history that, even from listening to your audio, How to Start a War, which was fantastic, even in that, there was so much that when I was in school, which was a million years ago anyway, but when I was in school, I didn't learn any of that stuff. It was quite focused, obviously, on the Holocaust. Don't let this atrocity happen again, but not the actual implementation of how we got to that point. And I think it strikes me as I'm listening to it. I was thinking, God, how is this not taught? How is this left out? It's the most of it. Horrifying. 10 million people murdered, horrifying. But how we got there, it seems to me that should have been the focus.
100%. Yeah, it is. I mean, if you consider, which I do, World War II and the Holocaust combined as being the greatest tragedy in human history, and I put that, the metric that I use to determine that is the death toll, which is the largest of any conflict that we've ever had. Human beings just eliminated, entire generations wiped off the face of the earth. Just a horrible, right, on every continent, in the land, sea, in the air, in death camps, but also on the street. And so if you consider it the worst thing that ever happened, to me, the next question is, how did it happen? How did we let it get this bad? And I agree with you that the how should be taught just as much as the what. Mm-hmm. And the how is something that is a lot. I think how helps you answer the question. I think it gives you the context for right. So I guess a better way of saying this is when you're taught about what happened in school, as matter of factly, this war happened, these countries fought each other, these people died, these groups of people were killed and persecuted. It's taught, when you hear it in that way, I think it sounds more like a inevitability, right? Like this happened, but to me, the thing that matters most is, how did it happen? Why did it happen? And what could have been done at several moments in this trajectory that could have prevented it from happening? Because we all know what happened, but it didn't need to happen this way. And so the story is sort of written as a tragedy. You're sort of following, you're in the room as the bad guys are doing their bad stuff, and you're kind of watching all of it happen. But what I also point out in every chapter is a moment in which a decision was made by good people that could have stopped these bad people, and how that decision was either overcome by the bad people or perhaps not made or wrongly made by the good people, when it just as easily could have gone the other way and prevented the worst. And so I'm trying to give people this sense that none of these bad things are inevitabilities. There's no version of the world that is bad that needs to necessarily happen. We have a ton of power to change those things, and understanding the specifics of how we got there gives us that knowledge, which gives us that power.
Mm-hmm. When you were growing up, was this information a big part of the family, or was this something that you started picking up on your own? And also in your studies as a kid, as you're going through your history lessons, had you been doing your own studying on the side because it was something that fascinated you? And did you see a disconnect of what was being taught versus what you were consuming yourself?
Yeah, I think early college, like for a lot of late teenagers, can be illuminating when you take that first, sociology class or, whatever. I grew up going to Catholic school. My family was not particularly religious, but grew up going to religious schools. And I was never particularly religious myself, but I remember the first month that I started going to university that was not religiously affiliated and not just being surrounded by it all the time, I took a course called Power and Society, which talked about the collaboration between, elite institutions in societies that work to maintain their power infrastructure at the expense of the vast majority of people. It's never close. It's always like 90-10 in the best cases, where, institutions like religions, like governments, like militaries, like media, conglomerates can back each other up, even though it sometimes seems they're adversarial. And I think that that's something that folks should be aware of. And I think that that was like an eye-opening education for me early on. And I think that kind of put me down the rabbit hole of the subjects that I was more interested in from a, educational standpoint.
Do you think if the Treaty of Versailles hadn't happened, that World War II might not have happened? Do you think that just absolute economic takedown of Germany? I mean, they were already pretty hurting, but do you think that...
Yeah.
What fascinates me in history and even in now, that in the present day, is that, as you were speaking to, like the sort of the power structure, the 90-10, that when a populace is hurting financially, economically, in the toilet, the irony of looking to the people that actually have the most and are hell-bent on keeping it that way, it's like, it's that classic sort of gaslight, looking to your abuser to save you.
Yeah. To answer your question directly, I think it may not have, if the Treaty of Versailles didn't happen, I think there's a chance World War II still happens because of the Great Depression. So there were really like two cataclysms in the German economy following the Great War, not including the war itself, which was a cataclysm in itself, right? The Kaiser, who was in charge of the German economy, did not do any financial planning for paying for the war. Usually when a country goes to war, they raise taxes and they, maybe borrow some money.
Or they have Cheney.
Right. And they do things to pay for the war, right? Wars are the most expensive things that countries can do. The Kaiser did none of those things, and he funded the entire war on borrowing. So, and he was counting on winning the war so that when he won, he would just get reparations from all of the countries that he destroyed, like France and England. But since France and England were the ones who won, they were the ones who instituted reparations on Germany in the Treaty of Versailles, and some territorial losses, and basically taking full blame for the war beginning that Germany had to do. So that was a cataclysm and a sort of, national pride destruction. A lot of rumors and to use a modern term, fake news would spread around that, Germany was actually about to win the war, but these people who were in charge kind of stabbed us in the back and pulled the rug out from our military. All right. So there was this cataclysm of the Treaty of Versailles and sort of burden that was put on the average German worker. But the borrowing is what led to hyperinflation, which turned a loaf of bread from I think something like 80 marks to 100 billion marks in a period of 3 months. So if you can imagine your entire life savings, the value of your home, I mean, literally everything is just gone. All of that happened, but then it was sort of brought under control by some economists that were brought in to fix the economy, to stabilize the German mark. And it felt for a while that the right-wing extremism that was sprouting up, and left-wing extremism at the time, at least for German standards,
communism
was a monarchy. Yeah. Large socialist movement. So there was sort of a sense that maybe the political extremism that was coming out as a result of the economic conditions would have subsided after the country was stabilized. And then the Great Depression happened. And that was a bomb that went off in Germany, almost actually probably worse than it was in the United States, which was the epicenter of the Great Depression, because a lot of the stabilization of the economy that Germany got when they sort of stabilized was based on loans coming in from the United States. And those stopped instantly when the US economy went into free fall. And so did the German economy again. So it's possible that World War II still happens without the Treaty of Versailles, but it's hard to tell because that Great Depression, I think, was going to happen one way or another, and it was going to affect the German economy too.
If only Hitler had gotten into art school, maybe.
That's actually really interesting. Yeah, maybe.
There's a great movie, actually. Have you ever seen Max? John Cusack?
No.
It's not many people have seen it. It's fascinating. And in it, John Cusack plays Max, a art dealer who comes across a young Adolf Hitler and who is a struggling artist. And it's this idea of what could happen, and yet the inevitable also. It's a fascinating take.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think about that sometimes. Yeah, he sort of just, in his like art days, sort of just walked around like a vagabond. He was getting money from somewhere. We don't really know where his money was coming from. It might have come from the estate that his parents left behind. They weren't like rich, but he had some means to live in Vienna by himself without a job and just paint. So yeah, it's hard to tell if he had gotten in. Yeah, maybe. I mean, he was always kind of crazy as a guy.
The madness and the self-loathing, I think, was always there, and we see that a lot with people in power. That their madness and their self-loathing creates a perfect storm, and everyone suffers. We see that a lot in history. I mean, and in present day.
Absolutely. He was always a racist. He was always an anti-Semite. He wrote about all of this stuff in his book, in his journals that we have. These were all things that he had while he was sitting in a prison cell before he had any power whatsoever. And he wasn't the only one, by the way. There was a ton of anti-Semitism and racism, extreme racism, like even for the time, happening in Central Europe, in most of Europe. But he was even more extreme than the average racist of the time.
Except for Berlin. Berlin seemed like it had a little conclave of just artist weirdos who everybody loved everyone. Everyone was gay and black and interesting.
Yeah, well, it's funny because he didn't grow up in Germany. He grew up in Austria. So Hitler's Austrian, not German. And you're right. Berlin, during the Weimar Republic period, the democracy that ran Germany in between World War I and World War II, or Hitler's rise to power, had a huge counterculture that was largely influenced by the overthrow of a monarchy, which had ruled Germany for a long time. It had been unified not that long ago. People consider Germany this like ancient country, and Germany as a region has been around, but Germany unified in 1871. World War I happened like 30 to 40 years later. So it hadn't been a unified state for that long, but it was a repressive monarchy. It didn't really have representation. It had a sort of pseudo parliament, but it didn't have any sort of pull like the British constitutional monarchy had. It was more of just a fake one to appease people. I think that there's something to be said about that sort of counterculture that Hitler very much saw as an abomination, although he had his own vices that are pretty interesting to understand too.
I mean, that's the thing, right? I would throw the word closeted. The people who are closeted in their desires, whatever they may be, they tend to aggressively attack people in those conclaves, right? Because they don't want the mirror.
Yeah.
mad that they can't be out in their proclivities, so they take down anyone who is.
That's right. Hitler, by the end of the war, was probably would be indistinguishable from a hyper drug user.
Oh, meth head, total meth head.
Huge meth head. He took narcotics. He took cocaine through eye drops. He took about 27 injections a day of drugs that would be today considered like class 1 narcotics. He had a quack doctor that, gave him all of this medication, followed him around everywhere with a briefcase full of drugs, and he took them. But he saw the drug use of Weimar Germany as, just an abomination and something that represented all of the things that were wrong with society. But of course, he took his drugs for medicinal purposes, not for recreation, even though he was absolutely blitzed 100% of the day.
As were his soldiers. I mean, that was, you mentioned a little bit in your book about how the soldiers were hyped out to. There's a video from the Olympics.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Hitler just tweaking out.
Yep. Yeah, he's there was a drug in Germany called Pervidin, which was made by the Bayer company, aspirin, and Pervidin was I think marketed as like an alternative to cigarettes and coffee for stimulation. And what we would, if you opened up Pervidin and looked at the chemical makeup of it, we would describe Pervidin as crystal meth. It was a pill that you just swallowed, and it's what, people say the Blitzkrieg. Oh my God, like the German army was moving so quickly, and you had tank drivers riding without sleep for 7 straight days. Like, how could they move so fast? It blew everything up. It's because everybody was methed out. It was in the daily ration of every German soldier. And so, the German soldiers were absolutely methed up. And like, if we're going to hold up the mirror, US soldiers had stimulants in their rations as well. Not quite crystal meth stimulants, but it is interesting how we treat our, the people that we ask to serve our country. We sort of get them addicted to pretty terrible stuff. So but it was at the extreme in the Third Reich for sure.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about propaganda. I had an interview with a guy that grew up, he's like 90 something, and he grew up during all of this obviously going on. And he talked about the propaganda then. And I said, can you imagine if Hitler had the internet? And he got very quiet and said, he does. And I thought, oh God, that's chilling. But of course, yes. But what really struck me, and again, not something that was taught in my classes, at least in high school and junior high, that Hitler really was on a wing and a prayer. He was lied about everything. Nothing he was threatening he didn't have any of that ability. And yet he just kept lying. And then the thing that really struck me, of course, it's not like I didn't know this as an adult, but again, didn't talk about it in history classes, that they would dress up like the quote unquote enemy and stage, insurrections basically in order to have a legitimacy to attack the next day and wipe everyone out. And I was like, wow, sounds pretty familiar, and all of that, of course, has been going on now, where there's this nebulous Antifa. And just yesterday I was watching something, and they're like, some of the masked guys that were Antifa showed up to the Portland and they were doing this and that. And then we got the mask off of one of them, and he was one of the super alt-right, not a Proud Boy, but like American national blah, blah, blah leader guy. And I thought, yeah, that fucking fits, So let's go back now.
Yeah.
Today, let's go back to then and how a masterful plan. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's a brilliant strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I think propaganda was an essential component of Hitler's rise to power, is an essential component of most political movements. But with the amount of control that the Third Reich had over all of the media outlets and ecosystems, but their mastery of it, right? So in particular, we talked about Joseph Goebbels. He was a failed playwright and an author, and so another failed artist. Of course, who was originally more aligned with a lot of the socialist movements of the time. His journals are remarkably well preserved and detailed. Most of them are available for free online, but they're like book versions you can just get on Amazon or something and read. And boy, that dude is an emotional roller coaster. I mean, he's like crying into his diary for decades, and it's all there, from his childhood to the war to, I mean, everything. But he writes a lot of the details of what he's done.
I can say if I go and look up journals, I'll get a call from Larry Ellison.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, what's going on there?
What are you doing over there? What's happening?
It's funny because as I was doing all the research for the book, I'm like, I really need to be careful about.
You're definitely on a list.
Yeah, I'm sure I am.
I know I'm on lists. You're definitely on.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's archives of this stuff that's available. But yeah, so just to use a couple of examples of propaganda that were used leading up to the acquisition of power. One of the examples I use is of Horst Wessel, who was a young Nazi who joined the street fighting paramilitary that Hitler controlled before he was in power, called the SA. They were like stormtroopers. Most of them were veterans from the war who didn't have work, who were frustrated and angry with the fact that all of their pensions that they got for fighting a brutal war were eliminated, and now they couldn't get work or feed their families. And so this was an opportunity to have work, but importantly to stop the people who they were told are responsible for all the problems in their country, the communists, the undesirables, the bankers, and I put air quotes around that because that's a shorthand that a lot of people like to use for Jewish people. Internationalists is another one. There is a young sort of Nazi that joins the street brawling SA, fighting communists in the street. And these are real street wars. I mean, they're not like people shoving each other, in a protest or in like a counter protest march. These are like, the closest thing I could compare it to is if anyone's ever seen Gangs of New York, where they're literally like murdering each other in battles on a large scale in the street. That's what's happening in Germany in the late 1920s and early 1930s. This one of those street brawlers in the Nazi SA is named Horst Wessel. He's murdered in one of these brawls, and he wrote a song before he died. He was like an aspiring songwriter, and he wrote a song that Joseph Goebbels uncovered, who was in charge of the propaganda wing of the Nazi Party. Which is funny that like you called it propaganda at the time. It's like, wouldn't you like, isn't that suspicious that like, yeah, I'm in charge of propaganda, but that at the time was a word that was used for like comms or communications or marketing, right? Like they sort of use the word propaganda. Anyway, he was in charge of that. And he decided to use this tragedy of one of their own being killed and use the song that this person wrote and made it the anthem of the Nazi Party. And what that allowed them to do is every time it was sung, it sort of brought to memory the violence and the threat from the other side. So it was just an example of propaganda, and there's all sorts of examples like that. But I think the false flag incidents you talk about are some of the most fascinating. Like World War II started with a false flag incident orchestrated by the Nazis on the border of Poland to make it seem like Poland was attacking them, but in reality it was staged by the SS, which was more of like the secret police, more advanced, more sophisticated than the SA was.
This is what boggles my mind. It's like, wait a minute. Now you know that these things happened in the past. Why is there such a disconnect in the present of what that is?
I think that is a frustration that I've had for a long time, and to maybe to tie it a little bit to the present day, because that's, it was an impetus to me writing this. Was I remember in 2015 and 2016, I had very close people in my life who were not necessarily supporters of some of the things that Trump and others were saying, but they were more like indifferent to it. Sort of like the arc of justice is, or the arc of history is long and bend towards justice kind of mentality, not understanding that people bend the arc of history, right? It's bent towards justice because people bend it, not because things just work out. And so I was seeing a lot of what I saw in the world. And even before Trump, I remember seeing the invasion of Crimea by Putin in 2014, which was carried out in a sort of commando style, unmarked uniforms way. What happened was the Russian government invaded a part of a sovereign country, Ukraine, with unmarked uniforms, and told a story that said there is an insurrection happening, a sort of revolt from within, and we're going to vote on being part of Russia instead of Ukraine. And we did it, and people want to be a part of Russia, and it's great. And it was just reported as fact that way by like really reputable institutions, right? I think I read it in like the New York Times, like reporting it as unmarked combatants. I think it was talked about in that way. And I'm like, guys, this is Russia. Like, what are we doing here? And I remember seeing that and saying like, oh, this is like exactly what happened in, the false flag incident in what was called the Gleibens incident, where Nazi unmarked, commandos attacked a German radio station in Germany on the border with Poland, killed Germans.
Had a patsy,
found one who was an activist against the German government, and used it as justification to start a war. And it was really frustrating that nobody kind of could tie these things together. And then it occurred to me that like, maybe people don't know these specifics of what happened. And it was my mission to make something really approachable that the person who doesn't even like history or care or doesn't read history could engage with and understand and even enjoy. And so that was kind of the mission that made me try to pursue this work.
Yeah, let's talk about it for a second. How to Start a War. It's on Audible. I looked for it on Libby. I didn't see it there, so I guess it's not there yet. But you did not do it in print form. You did it in storytelling form. I finished it. It's fantastic. It's very hard to put down. It's hard to listen to in some places, not because it's beautifully done, but it's just heavy in places. So but I want everyone to listen to it. And the way you did do it in a theatrical way in places, I thought was really cool. And that you interwove the speeches from the time frame. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it, hearkening back to when I was young and listening to radio theater. So well done on that. And I thought about it this morning as I was making my coffee and eating my oatmeal. I thought, if this sort of way of learning had been around when I was younger, I feel like so much more would have been absorbed, because
Yeah.
everybody learns in a different way. Some people learn very well being talked to by a teacher. I think this would have worked much better for me. My brain was staring out the window and drawing in books and whatever. But yeah, it's really good. It's really, really, really
Thank
good.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, we learn through stories. Stories is we're wired to learn through stories. Even before we could write down things as human beings, we were told stories to learn things. And so I'm a big fan of storytelling. And I think if you can tell a story that has a lot of lessons in it, it's a great way for people to absorb those lessons. This period in time had a really interesting advantage to telling the story in this way, because in some cases we had actual scripts of what was said. So to use an example, the conquest of Austria, which a lot of people sort of overlook in the history of the lead up to World War II. Germany wanted Austria. And they were the first country that they targeted for expansion before the war began. And Germany had this large military buildup that they sort of did illegally following the war. Austria didn't really do that.
For people that don't know, according to the treaty, Germany was not allowed to warmonger or have a military as such.
That's right. That's right. They, the largest land army on the planet Earth, which was the German armed forces during World War I, was reduced to the size of the army of Greece. It was after the Treaty of Versailles, when the war ended, Germany was no longer allowed to have an army larger than 100,000 infantry, no tanks, no airplanes, no ships, no submarines, right? All of the things that someone would use to fight a modern war. And all of the combatants who, lost the war had that stipulation attached to their surrender. Germany, once Hitler came to power after a couple of years, publicly defied that. He secretly defied it for a couple of years before, but then when he felt like he would have been ready to defend himself, he announced it publicly. The first target that they wanted to basically threaten into submission was Austria, because Austria didn't really do that military buildup. There was always this dream of a unified Germany and Austria that Hitler had, who was an Austrian, who was, by the way, banned from Austria, wasn't allowed to be there. So he couldn't even be in Austria without conquering it.
Part of the impetus, probably, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
And poor Austrians just running around singing in the mountains, making clothes out of curtains.
Yeah. And so to do this conquest, basically, Hitler summoned the Chancellor of Austria, is like the Prime Minister of Austria, the President of Austria, if you will, to Germany to negotiate something small, right? Not the sovereignty of its nation. And in that meeting, Hitler said, "We're going to invade you. It's going to happen in 4 weeks. It's up to you to decide how many Austrians are going to die, but we're doing it, like the machine's already moving. So let me know, and we'll make a decision in 4 weeks. Have a great trip back." The Chancellor of Austria obviously is scared to death. Goes back to the president of. They had a system similar to Germany where you had a president who was like, think of them as like the king or the queen, the ceremonial president, and then the chancellor who kind of ran the country, like a prime minister does. And he talked to the president. The president was like, we're not doing that. Like, that's crazy. Like, we're going to resist. And so the chancellor tries, and basically what happens is Germany, the Nazis insert a Nazi sympathizer into the Austrian cabinet and communicate with him over the course of 4 weeks to orchestrate a coup, which ends up taking place. And that orchestration, all of that work that's done, and they're like frantic work that's done to orchestrate that coup is all done over the phone. And what's wild about that is Hermann Göring, who was the number 2 man in the Third Reich, the sort of chief operating officer of the Third Reich, his entire office transcribed every phone call that went in and out of the office. So the conquest of Austria done by telephone is word for word copied down. And it was translated into English for the Nuremberg trials after the war ended. And so these scenes, these frantic phone calls, the misunderstandings, the miscommunications are all available for us to read, and they read like drama. I mean, it's incredible. And so the words that I use in the book, where I think it's chapter 4 or 5, is literally just those phone calls. And so you're hearing the back and forth between Berlin and Vienna. They give the wrong information and then they freak out, and it causes delay. It's an incredible advantage to this kind of storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it really makes you in it.
Yeah. Yeah. You're certainly in the room. And there's other types of transcripts you hear that in the room that I think are even worse. For example, after the Night of Broken Glass, which was sort of the first moment that is considered the beginning of the Holocaust.
And a great example of the propaganda, because they went and destroyed all these Jewish property and homes and then turned around and blamed it on the Jews and said that they were rioting.
That's right. That's right. What's crazy about that is, and this kind of goes back to like the actual words that were spoken, all of the Jewish businesses that were destroyed by the German government, the SA and SS troops who were dressed in plain clothes made to look like the average German just freaking out and rioting at Jews, because what had happened is a German diplomat in France had been assassinated by a Jewish assassin whose family had just been deported to Poland and left to kind of starve. 12,000 Jews had just been deported in this like dramatic arrest. So that had happened, and it was used as a moment to say, we're going to put the hammer down and we're going to destroy all these Jewish businesses. And so they orchestrate this arson, moment in a single night. But it turns out that all of those Jewish businesses, while those businesses might have been owned by Jewish business owners, the buildings in which those Jewish businesses ran were actually owned by Germans. Germans who were now filing insurance claims on all of the broken glass, the windows that were smashed, the furniture that was broken. And the German insurance industry was about to go bankrupt because they had done like years and years and years worth of damage in a single night. And now the German insurance companies were screwed. They actually had to get bailed out by the German government because if they had defaulted on that, it would be a black eye on the German insurance industry. So there is this meeting that took place after the Night of Broken Glass with Hermann Göring, the same guy who conquered Austria over the telephone, who's also in charge of the economy. And he said, couldn't you have just killed more Jews instead of destroying so many valuables? Right? He says this in a conference room with insurance CEOs, and Goebbels is there too. And the biggest crisis in in Germany at that time was not how it was on the brink of persecuting an entire population, but all of the broken glass and destruction that they caused. And that meeting was also transcribed. And so you can hear the word, over lunch, they're discussing all of the ways that they can further punish everybody, all the Jewish Germans who they see as responsible.
Part of the thing that really got me while listening to your book was how it did feel like at any step of the way, Hitler could have been stopped. in the beginning. And as to your point of this idea that if you just sit there and do nothing, nothing will happen. And I started thinking about Chamberlain, and I thought, well, what if it had been, what part of all of this story was an inevitability? If it had been Churchill instead of Chamberlain, how would that have changed things? If it had, but at the end, spoiler, genocides happen all over the world all the time. You make that great point. It's like this stuff is constantly happening all over the world all the time. And it isn't necessarily that great men do nothing, but more that regular people do nothing.
It's both. It's both. I think that, and I use examples of this throughout the story, there are moments when the traditional, quote, great man could have done something, like Chamberlain, like could Neville Chamberlain have stood up to Hitler at the Munich conference. This was the moment when Czechoslovakia was abandoned and allowed to be invaded by Germany by the Western democracies, Britain and France. France, who, by the way, was allies with Czechoslovakia, and they were like, "Look, we gotta give Hitler a pound of flesh, or he's going to start a war. We all just went through World War I. We don't want to deal with that again, right?" And so, that was a moment when Hitler could have been stopped. But way before then, Hitler could have been stopped by the average person. One example is when Hitler was appointed chancellor, when he was put in the position that basically sealed the deal of his trajectory, that he got enough reins over power that he could kind of do the rest on his own. The Nazi Party never held a majority in the Congress. It never even came close. And the rules of the Weimar Republic work a lot like they do in Great Britain or the United States, where the majority party gets to pick who's going to run the country. The people with the most votes, the party with the most votes, and they need a majority in order to have a chancellor running the show. But a majority could not be formed in the German Congress, which is called the Reichstag. And so that happened. The no single party having a majority happened because they had a multi-party system, and both certainly the opposition to the right-wing extremists could not get their stuff together and ally and stand up against a common threat, which was this extreme right-wing authoritarian group. There were too many sort of ideological purity tests that were put in place by a lot of the groups on the left at the time, and it caused ruptures to the point where they couldn't unify to stand up against a common threat. So that has to do with the average voter, and it's it's sad because more could have been done, certainly.
Yeah, the grand irony is the worst case scenario happened because they didn't stand up, because they, in their minds, they thought, oh God, we don't want another war, but the war inevitably was going to transpire if they didn't stop him. So they were in this weird catch-22. That seems to be the fear of what might happen. This specter of what might happen seemed to stop people in their tracks. And I mean, the truth is that look what happened. That's what happens. What might happen, that will happen.
Yeah. I think it's hard to put ourselves in the shoes of really anybody who was alive in Europe in the 1930s.
They were starving.
Yeah. And they had all just lived through the worst event, like mass casualty event in human history in World War I. And it wasn't that much further out. It was like 20 years in between wars. And so everybody who was a senior statesperson was a young person during the Great War. And it was a thing that people saw as the worst case scenario and would try to prevent by any means necessary. So it is sort of hard to put ourselves in those shoes. But I think, to your point, that fear can blind you to the reality of what's in front of you, because what came as a result of that capitulation was worse than what they had all just gone through.
It is wild to think that it went World War I to World War II. Then we had, there was Korea, there was Vietnam. It's just, my God. And then all the skirmishes in between and all the other places. Humans our level for fuckery is so high.
Yeah, it's pretty high. I mean, we could talk all about sort of the world orders that were put in place after World War II, but yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, and sometimes it's a little sad, but I think that we learn through tragedy in the same way people learn through failure, better than right. Yeah, we learn. I would say we learn through tragedy more than we learn through maybe victory or success. If we had to pick one or the other. That's not to say that we always learn or even learn the majority of the time, but sort of getting your medicine can sometimes be a lesson in that you take to heart, more. And so that's kind of the framing of the story is like, how it ends, but it didn't need to end this way. And here are all the times it could have been better.
I think that your book is certainly a call to arms, which I appreciate. Certainly your TikTok, which tell people how to find you. Also, are you a teacher? Do you teach?
No, I don't. But you can follow on all the social medias, How to Start a War, and on TikTok, and How to Start a War book on Instagram. And then there's the book, How to Start a War. And the website, howtostartawar.com. I like to use the social channels as more of a modern comparison, more explicitly than the book does. The book is sort of a parallel, but I don't beat readers over the head with it. The social channels, the videos are a lot more connected to the modern day and really kind of the news of the week.
The podcast, it mirrors the book?
Yeah, so the book actually started off as a podcast, and that's how it was discovered and published by Blackstone. So it started off as a serialized miniseries released over a podcast. So people can listen to that for free. Actually, there is a sort of expanded and new edition of it that was released on Audible, which I think is the best version of the story, the most complete version of it. As what I originally intended. So yeah, it's I think it's a call to arms, in a way that just lets people know and reminds them of what they're all capable of. And that while some of these things might seem inevitable, they never, ever are. And it's on us to be aware of those things and to take advantage of the power that we have while we still have it. Because as powerful as we are right now, there are times when it becomes too late. Mm-hmm. And it's on us to be aware of these moments and the power that we have so that we can make the world better in the way that we want to be the good we want to see in the world.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that. My fear, of course, is that there's now a really good playbook by which to go by. So,
yeah. There's always been good playbooks, honestly.
Yeah.
There's new technology that makes some of those playbooks different or easier to execute. While I don't think that, maybe we're sort of in weird situations now where the person at the apex of power in the United States is less of an ideologue, because usually it's the ideologue at the top of the power structure. But there are ideologues that surround that person with a lot of power who know these playbooks really, really well, who have studied them.
Stephen Miller comes to mind. Yeah.
Stephen Miller absolutely comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
certainly, yeah, he certainly does. I imagine he is extremely well versed in a lot of these tactics.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious, actually.
It's not subtle.
It's not subtle.
No one accused them of ever being subtle.
No. Yeah. Here's my fear too, is that when people are so entrenched in the worshiping of a political figure, the worshiping of anyone, celebrity, a politician, someone in the family, any of that hero worship stuff, dangerous, dangerous stuff, because it then removes your ability to see it's a glimmer. It's a emperor's new clothes. It removes the ability to see what's actually there, because suddenly your emotional, your ego, your sense of self is so tied up into worshiping of this thing. And whew, God, that's so dangerous. And it's so easy to manipulate you when you're in that state.
History does that too. There is a tendency for history to focus on the most powerful figures as the main characters of the story when they make up such a small portion of the population. I mean, the next story that I'm working on is about the Russian Revolution, and all of the history that we've read about the Russian Revolution is, Lenin and Stalin and Trotsky and Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia, and that's it. Whereas 80% of the Russian population at the time of the revolution were rural peasants who lived below the poverty line. Could you imagine if 80% of the United States lived below the poverty line and then had a revolution, and the part that we focused on were 2 to 3 figures that did not belong to the class of 80% of the population who it most dramatically affected? It's crazy to me that we focus on these sort of great figures, these powerful figures, when while they had power, they are empowered by the average person. They don't get that power without the consent of the average person, and most people don't see that. And that's something that there's great examples of books that try to do that in the American system. People's History of the United States comes to mind by Howard Zinn, a wonderful telling of the story of American history, but through the lens of the average person on the receiving end of the power. And that's sort of a really good formative work to check out.
Excellent read.
Yeah, it's dense. Audible version of that is wonderful too.
However you need to take in this sort of stuff, do it. I am on the camp of an Audible is reading, or a Libby is reading.
Oh yeah, same. 100%. I mean, it's long form media, information, entertainment. Yeah, I'm a big advocate of. Also you can just do it more, especially if you have errands or kids or obligations and commutes, right? You can take in a lot more information through audio than you would if you just had to restrict yourself to reading a book.
What I find fascinating is that in a way, in documentaries do this, but really in the mythology of, say, the Marvel or any of those sort of stories, it's the underdogs that are focused on, and the fighting against tyranny and the winning against tyranny. And that's the thing. But weirdly, as you say, historically speaking, in the education of history, it's always about to the victors go the spoils. It's focusing on more the bad actors and almost in an almost celebratory way that they will for sure live in infamy. But it's such a disconnect to me. Like, how can we root for the underdog so much, and then you believe it when the tyrant is somehow the underdog? It boggles the mind.
I mean, there's a lot of interesting political theory around the idea of tolerable opposition, in the sense that there can be opposition that speaks out against a system but within the bounds of some guidelines that do not themselves threaten the system as a whole. A Marvel movie that is produced and distributed for profit by one of the world's largest media companies can create a story about an underdog that people can pay to see and consume because they like the story. But if a person were to go out and be sort of a vigilante justice, warrior fighting against a system, they'd probably get arrested. And so I think there's like containment fields for opposition that allow for those urges and thoughts to exist and in some ways exhaust themselves or as like a release valve to alleviate pressure in someone's thoughts and mind. But acting on those things yourself would not be acceptable. So it's like an outlet for those urges, I think, is why that dichotomy happens.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I just think of sitting in a room and cheering for everyone of Wakanda and then sort of looking the other way when Black people are being treated the way they're treated. Yeah, it's like, wait, what? What's going on here?
Yeah.
We are in such a bizarro time. And then I keep thinking like, okay, and then there's some giant thing hurtling in space towards us. If this is the end, God bless a reset, You have little kids, so you probably don't have that sensibility, but I'm just like, I get it.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I get that too. I do. Right. It's clean. Very Thanos-esque of you on the subject of Marvel. But, I think what we will sometimes overlook, even in those clean quote, moments, is just how much suffering would have to take place in order for that to happen. And, you talk about, having kids. To me, right, I know there's a whole school of thought of like, why would I bring kids into this world? And there's so much bad, like I wouldn't want to give them or put them or feel responsible for putting them into a climate that's changing, to a system of government that's moving towards authoritarianism, to, maybe that feel like they're powerless, and education and all the stuff that's going poorly. My response to that is, we need more soldiers on our side. Mm-hmm. And if you're a good person, that means you can raise good people. And we need more good people. And so, I look at my two sons who are 3 and 2 years old. And I look at them as sort of our best shot to make this world better. And I'll do everything I can to pave that way for them, give them the opportunities that they can have. And then it's going to be passing the baton to them and me stepping aside and saying, we need your help, man.
Yeah. I appreciate that optimism, certainly. And I mean, let's get these new generations. Somewhere in there are the people that will save us all. That's a hell of a burden to put on someone, but I mean, every generation feels that way.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say I'm optimistic, to be honest, right? It might sound like what I'm saying is optimistic, but I think optimism requires a sense that things are going to work out on the trajectory that they're currently on. And I don't think the trajectory we're currently on is something to be optimistic about. I think that enough good people can bend the arc towards justice, but it has to be actively done. So to your point about my work being a call to arms, it very much is, because it's necessary. Good things don't happen because things just work out. They happen because people make them happen. And if we get enough good people who know of the power that they have, then they can make it happen.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for your time and your intellect and your inspiration, and How to Start a War, which is on Audible. Go check it out, everyone.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here. I really enjoyed the conversation, and this was great.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. And anytime you write something new, come back and talk about it. I'll read it and we'll chat it up. And thank you for listening, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.